Speaking today is Dr. Huffman, and so he's going to be talking about some of the work he's done with outdoor education and outdoor safety. So, thank you.
First of all, before I get started, I have something to pass out. Don't cheat and look on the back, okay? So later on. So don't turn it over to the back until we go on. You use it as a bookmark, so it has some utilitarian use later on. Happy birthday. I can't promise anything. No, because yeah, like golf, you determine personal character on that one. Yeah. All right. I'm tall.
Do not look on the back.
What? Like this alcohol. Now I want to.
Way down. Either way.
Wait. I don't get one left.
Right there. There.
Oh.
No offense.
I think so.
But I want to look on the back.
You can look on the back in a few minutes. Okay. I'm going to be talking about online safety information as it relates to outdoor activities, but I'm passing these out. Thanks. I'll be talking about safety information in other areas as well, because it's really something that doesn't exist in an environment by itself. But I have noticed much more in the way of outdoor information. People are learning about outdoor activities. They're looking to the internet in order to get that information. So some of my students will tell you that I'm a big fan of quotes. And this is two quotes from John Muir. The first one, "Climb the mountains and get there good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will fall off like autumn leaves." He's really eloquent. He wrote that in 1901. The second quote he wrote in 1875, 3 years after the establishment of the world's first national park, Yellowstone National Park. And on this one he stated, "Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wildness is a necessity, and that mountain parks and reservations are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating rivers, but as fountains of life." And when you look at John Muir, he was very instrumental in getting a lot of the areas established, many of the first national parks. He was kind of eccentric too. John Muir liked to experience things. One of the experiences he did, he's lucky to have survived. He wanted to know, what was it like to be one of the tall trees in Yosemite Valley to experience a thunderstorm? And so he climbed to the top of a tree during a thunderstorm and had the full impact of the storm hitting. So he did some things that today would be looked at as kind of crazy. But when I show you some other stuff that's going on in a lot of the outdoor activities, you may not think it's quite as crazy as some of the things that are actually going on. So if the words that he just said in 1875 were true back then, imagine what they're like today. Visitation numbers have just skyrocketed. This is just the National Park Service over 3 years from 2015, 2015 to 2016. National Park Service broke visitation records for the third year in a row. It's incredible how many people are going into the parks. If you look right here, here's Great Smoky Mountains National Park right here in Tennessee. The most popular, most heavily visited tourist attraction, if you want to call it, in the state of Tennessee, with over 11 million visitors a year. Some of the others you look at, Golden Gate in San Francisco, Blue Ridge Parkway, many of the others are around urban areas, and the national parks have some pretty significant sites near very urban type areas, so they get a lot of visitation. But the Grand Canyons near the bottom down there, certainly not insignificant. They had almost 6 million. With all of this, one of the things that people have been writing about, been noticing, and I've actually had some personal experience with this, I'll call it trouble in paradise. People getting into trouble while engaging in activities in parks and recreation areas. A lot of people let their guard down, I think, when they go to these areas. They think it's safe. They don't look at the environment as having many hazards. And as a result, they get into trouble from time to time. The Center for Disease Control reports that 213,000 people were treated in emergency rooms for outdoor accidents in 2008. I think this is underrepresented because, for one thing, we're not looking, or they're not looking at a lot of the emergency clinics, the small clinics. This is mainly hospital emergency rooms, but certainly a significant number. From 1992 to 2007, there were 65,439 SAR, or search and rescue incidents, involving 78,000 individuals in U.S. National Park units. That's a lot of hurt people when you stop and think about it. The number one problem that most of the SAR personnel talk about when they're dealing with individuals who are in trouble is the fact that for the vast majority, they leave their brains at home. They just don't think about what they're getting involved in. And that relates a lot to education and information. Where are they getting education and information? And how's it being communicated? I think the scope of this situation grows even greater when you stop and think, here are statistics just for the National Park Service, but we have 49 states that have state park systems. We've got the U.S. Forest Service, we have Army Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Land Management, a myriad of other agencies at state, federal, and even local areas that are engaging in these kinds of endeavors to help people who are getting in trouble. A lot of sheriff's departments do rescues for individuals at the local level. I thought it would be interesting to look at this from the perspective of a search and rescue team at Grand Canyon National Park. Now, the data, or at least this particular day, is 1996, but this is hard data to obtain. They don't publish it all that often, but I thought this was significant. The Grand Canyon National Park, in many years, averages over 400 rescues a year. Now, you stop and think about the number of people that are going out to treat, help, and in many cases retrieve other individuals who got into trouble. Here's July 23rd, 1996. At 12:30 a.m. there was a report of an overdue hiker. This isn't all that uncommon. At 4:30 in the morning, hiker still hadn't been heard from by the family or friends, so they fly out search teams to walk the trails and beaches and look for this particular missing hiker. At 10:30, they found the missing hiker. At 1300 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the hiker and the search teams make it out of the canyon. 10 minutes later, they get a call from Phantom Ranch. This is a lodging facility at the very bottom of the Grand Canyon, right on the Colorado River. And they report that they have a 10-year-old male with CPR in progress. They fly the helicopter team, the rescue team, to go down. They're equipped with paramedics, and they pick up the victim, try to treat him en route, but he dies at the clinic. While they're at the clinic, they get another call for another heat stroke emergency, this time a 52-year-old female. They get 2 more requests for service that afternoon and evening. At 21:30, the last rescue was completed, and they did their debriefing for the day. It ought to be noted that on July 23rd, the inner canyon temperature was 114 degrees. That's unbelievably hot. And people who go down into the Grand Canyon don't realize sometimes just how draining that can be. If you're an experienced hiker and you're going to be going up, you wait until 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening to start out. You certainly don't start out in the middle of the day with temperatures like that. But people get into trouble here all the time. Not that the Park Service doesn't try to warn individuals. Here's one of the more recent signs that they put up, in which it says danger warning. Do not attempt to hike from the canyon rim to the river and back in one day. Each year, hikers suffer serious illness or death from exhaustion. I have to admit, I'm one of the individuals who's hiked down to the bottom and back to the river and back in a day. I've done it a bunch of times. But there are a lot of people who don't have the experience, don't know when to hike, they don't carry enough hydration and a variety of things to really keep themselves from getting into trouble. So that's one reason why they have a warning like that. One time, I was hiking down to the bottom, and I heard these footsteps coming rather quickly behind me. And I looked, and here comes a runner. He's got a fanny pack belt on with water bottles in it. And he starts to go by and says, "How are you?" And I said, "Great, how are you?" He says, "Wonderful." And he's going down. I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "You going all the way down to the river?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "And then back up?" He says, "No, I'm going up the other side." And I said, "Wow, is somebody going to meet you over there?" He says, "No, I'm coming back." This guy was capable of running down a 7-mile trail to the bottom, 14 miles up to the other side, 14 miles back down, and then 7 miles up the other, with a mile's worth of elevation change in one way down. So it was an incredible feat that this individual has. There are people that can do it, but there's still others who think they can do it that get into trouble all the time. I thought it'd be interesting to look a little bit at this particular park and find out what are the most dangerous activities. You know, what really gets people into trouble. We won't go into all of them, but if you look at it, here's day walking, right through here, day hiking if you want to call it. And right over here, hiking overnight. This is the vast majority of the types of activities that got people in trouble. They're the most dangerous. A lot of people ask me, what is it with over snow vehicles on the Grand Canyon? The North Rim is really high and the roads are shut down all winter long with snow, so people take snowmobiles up into that area, and every once in a while they get into trouble. Where do the accidents occur? Well, the vast majority occur on what are called corridor trails, this portion right here. And a corridor trail on the Grand Canyon is basically, think of it as a super highway trail. Huge numbers of people going into the canyon and out. Some are going to go all the way down, some are just going to go partially for a day hike and see some of the views. One day I thought it was fun just to count how many people I encountered on a trail, on the Bright Angel Trail, which is one of the corridor trails. And I quit counting when I hit 350. I just stopped. That's a lot of people to encounter on a trail. And I usually don't want to be in areas that are that crowded, but because of the view at the Grand Canyon, I will go to places like that. You'll notice the river had a portion of it as well, and this is world-class rapids there. And then the other significant portion, right here are wilderness trails. These aren't the big corridor trails. These are typically more rugged and found throughout the park. And then the Phantom Ranch area. This could be people who've hiked down or people who are floating the river that stop at that area. What were the contributing factors? What's getting people into trouble? Again, this park is kind of interesting to look at because I think some of the contributing factors that were found here transferred to a lot of other places. And if you look, about 50% was fatigue or physical condition. A lot of people just weren't ready for the challenge of doing this. Another big chunk right above that is falling. All the others are smaller in terms of what happened. I thought it was also interesting, I guess the next biggest is judgment error. People not making the right decision. Should I try and go all the way down? Should I go back? Maybe the weather's getting bad. Looking at different decisions. Is the Grand Canyon an isolated case? Well, Yellowstone National Park had a married couple who approached bison while they were videotaping. This happens all of the time. As they closed the distance to 30 feet, the bison charged and injured the videographer. I've seen videos of people where the bison's not quite positioned where they think it ought to be, and they've picked up sticks and thrown it at the animal, and then wondered why it turned around and attacked. If you want to get an idea for just how
these home videos show, even the
intense
Austin
this
bison
is.
seems docile enough to pet. The these are not predictable creatures. They are wild animals in a domesticated setting. Some visitors are tempted to get just a little closer to these marvelous beasts.
The bison's giving him all kinds of warnings right now.
But when you see one paw the ground, like this bison behind the tree, beware.
I thought it was interesting, the grouse had more common sense than the man did. And then he walks around the back to try and approach the animal again.
He escaped with only a gash in the leg.
Some people are just
It
hard-headed.
can confirm that even though wildlife looks harmless, it is still wild.
A few other examples, again, just to try to demonstrate what park personnel and other people at recreation areas deal with. Rangers were dispatched to rescue a couple from their sinking boat. This was probably Lake Mead or someplace like that, I forget. But when they got there, they found that no one was wearing a life jacket with the exception of the dog. That's the only animal that had on a life jacket. Hikers have used their cell phones to call Grand Teton Park Rangers to request the delivery of some hot chocolate. And again, I guess they think it's a full-service park that if they need something, they just pick up the phone and call. And they indicated they were in trouble. And when they got there, the trouble was they'd run out of hot chocolate. I've had students who've written papers for me and talked about different things, and some of them view satellite beacons, something where you can actually activate a distress call. And a lot of boats have these when they go on long voyages in the oceans. And a party in the Grand Canyon had one. They used their satellite beacon to summon helicopters 3 times for water. They didn't carry enough water. And the third time, when they arrived, they mainly said the water they got before was too salty. So it's unbelievable what people are doing. But it also indicates another major trend, and that is for people to rely on technology to protect them, rather than relying on giving themselves the equipment and the knowledge to stay out of trouble. This is happening more and more in so many different areas. Okay, could you survive a night out? I gave you, each of you, a bookmark. You can use it. Off the top of your head, think, what do you need? There's something that's called the 10 essentials. Do you think you could identify what you would need to spend the night out? Yeah, go ahead and fill it out, sure. Mm-hmm. See if you can come up.
Flashlight.
I'm thinking of everything Tim would put on there that's completely non-essential.
Like M&M's?
Top 5.
M&M.
Big Mac.
Is it like a, so is it overnight, so like sleeping, right?
Yes, this is something that you ought to have. They actually recommend that you carry this, even if you're thinking about going on a day hike.
Oh, really?
Sometimes you get surprised. You sprain an ankle, and you get caught someplace. Could you spend the night? And a lot of individuals do get into trouble. Many people from our region, because when they go out west, they get into the mountains and they don't understand the changes in temperatures that occur even in the summertime, and they're grossly unprepared for. You can almost cheat a little bit and look at the graphic up there and see some of the things that ought to be included. This is called the 10 essentials. I'm curious, what came off the top of your head? What did some of you put down?
Flashlight.
Water, very good.
Jacket.
Yes. Flashlight, okay. Jacket, extra jacket. What now?
Plastic tarpus.
Okay, definitely.
Plastic tarp.
Okay, like an
First aid
emergency
kit.
shelter, and a lot of things could qualify for that.
Matches or lights or?
Yes.
First aid kit. Or,
Good, good.
Dried fruit, dried.
Something to eat, yes, something to eat, definitely. You guys would be the exceptions, I think. to many people.
No, I wouldn't.
Need something to summon a helicopter from really hot chocolate.
There you go. Definitely need that. Or even better, you
You're
know.
getting so-so
dinner.
instead of blame the companies that actually have so-so.
Yeah, that's something, you know, that's a really good point
Yeah.
because, well, the last time I was in Yellowstone, which has been about 5 years ago, not to do a commercial for the carrier that I have, I won't tell you who the carrier I have, but it generally works in places where a lot of other people's cell phones do not, and mine worked in 2 places in Yellowstone National Park, and it was close to very highly populated areas.
Has to be AT&T.
No, it's actually
Has to be
Verizon.
Okay.
Yeah.
I made it tell.
Are you saying that anytime I go to a national park, I'm advised to carry that with me?
If you're hiking and going any distance, I mean,
Because you said like, let's say I'm going for a long hike, but I'm not thinking of spending overnight, right? And so I'm gonna be unprepared. So
Yes.
if I go to a hiking more than 3 hours, I should carry all that?
yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it will fit in a day pack. It'll fit in a small pack.
Okay.
But the extra water, the food.
Well, water and food, yeah, but like, I would never take like tools,
Okay, tools.
knife, like. no.
Tools. Oh, I'm not getting it out of my pocket. A small knife. You know, a small knife. Something like
Swiss
that.
knife.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, Swiss Army knife. Here are the newest, the new 10 essentials. You can see how well you did. Navigation would be something to find your way so that you don't get lost. A lot of people do get lost from time to time. And I often tell my students, if you want to do one technique that would help prevent you from getting lost while you hike, one of the things that you can do if you're walking, periodically just stop, turn around, and look behind you, because it looks differently oftentimes when you go back than it is there. And there have been people who walked back and thought they were lost when they were actually on the right path. You know, to get back, they'd actually walk down there. So navigation is important. Sun protection, particularly if you're in the mountains with snow, you can come down with sun blindness. And sunscreen of some sort is really important. Insulation, mentioned extra clothing, something for rain protection. Illumination, flashlight, headlamp is really good. First aid kit, something to start fires. I usually carry 2 sources, matches and then a flint magnesium fire stick that's great. Repair kit, that's nothing all that big really. Mine is about this big in a little pill bottle. It has safety pins, it's got duct tape wrapped around the outside of it, and some buttons and just things that might be like that. But like if your boots come apart, you could take duct tape and wrap around and fix something. So duct tape is a universal repair. Nutrition, something to eat, hydration, drinking, and then an emergency shelter. And that doesn't have to be a full-blown tent. That could be something as small as a space blanket that would fit in a package about this big. But the 10 essentials have really shown to keep people alive in a lot of cases. And many times people don't intend to go out very long. And they end up tripping, spraining an ankle, and sometimes they're forced to stay there. And temperatures in the mountains plummet a lot
Can
of
you
times.
buy a kit that has all of these?
Yes, you can. Yeah, it'd be
Gift
cheaper to
shop?
get it on your own, but yes, you can. And I'll just say this as a footnote: we live in perhaps one of the most dangerous earthquake zones around, and it wouldn't hurt all of us to have something like this already packed up, available. I tell my students sometimes, what are you going to do if the big one happens? And they say, I'm going to call. I said, no, you won't. The cell towers are going to be down. Your cell phone's not going to work. And there's going to be fires. There's going to be all kinds of things. I don't want to preach doomsday, but give you a little background about some of my research before I get into describing the study that I want to share with you today. I've had an interest in outdoor recreation activities and information, how people get it, how managers can use it to help manage visitors, and a lot of it's relating to communication. One of the early studies I did was my dissertation study back before, I don't even want to say it, Windows and all of this stuff. I wrote a computer program and compared it to a brochure for redistributing backcountry trail use in Rocky Mountain National Park. And we were successful with using both. A brochure had been used similar in another park, but never compared to a computer program. So I had an interest in computers even way back. I also did a study with the U.S. Forest Service some time ago. They were curious about a new communication effort that they were doing to make people aware of winter hazards, particularly avalanche hazards. Many people don't realize how many individuals every year are trapped by avalanches, killed by avalanches. These are cross-country skiers, downhill skiers who go out of bounds, snowmobilers. Unbelievable numbers of people find themselves in trouble from time to time. I also did a study with a psychologist here on campus in Acadia National Park where we were trying to improve compliance with campground regulations. And we wanted to see, was there another technique that might be more effective, maybe using humor. And so we did it. We had bears illustrating all the bad things you shouldn't do in the campground, and gave that with the idea that maybe people would look at it as opposed to a list of regulations. Past studies have shown that for visitors, regulations are at the very bottom of their priority list for information. It's at the very top for the managers. That's what they want to communicate the most. So combining it with something else can be effective. This is what really grabbed my attention and sort of came to be the catalyst for what I'm going to share with you that I did most recently. This is the back cover of an outdoor magazine, actually a climbing magazine. And I used to climb and mountaineer and do these activities a lot. And as I've gotten older and orthopedically challenged, I don't do that anymore. But this grabbed my attention. The famous climber, this is him climbing right here. It's hard to tell up on the screen like this. But all this green down here, these are trees, treetops. He's that high. And if you would look at it closely, you can even use a magnifying glass, you'll find he has no safety equipment. There's no rope, there's no helmet, there's nothing. And then the ad, no rules, no regulations, no qualifying rounds, no teams, no uniforms, no trophies, no spectators, just you and a pair of boots. When I worked at Chattahoochee National Recreation Area, we had some rock climbing areas, cliffs that were near the river. And I was called to go out and assist with a rescue of a 16-year-old boy who had been climbing. He had two girlfriends, who were the spectators, so it wasn't quite true on that were watching him. He climbed 35 feet off the ground, no safety equipment, and then fell backwards like this. Hit the rocks, broke his pelvis, damaged his spine at the lumbar region, and we had to pack him out. We couldn't land a helicopter in the area because there were so many trees. It was so heavily forested. There was no road that went back into the area. So we had to put him on a spine board and then a litter and carry him out 5 miles, a rescue team of 12 people. The whole time, this guy was in a great deal of pain, and finally got him on an ambulance. We found out later on that he is paralyzed. So that was really tragic. It made an impression on me because he was wearing that brand of shoes. Now, whether or not he had ever seen it, I don't know. But I know 16-year-old males particularly often view themselves as being indestructible. And I wonder sometimes, what do we communicate with advertising? What do we communicate with other kinds of messages? Here's some things that have been even a little more recent on online information. This is what got me into doing this particular study. Regular internet access has really become the norm. We all know this. 70 million households, 62% had it in 2003. That was up dramatically. It's closer to 100% now. 99% of all U.S. public schools have access to the internet. An Intel survey discovered that 61% of adults said they could not live without the internet. I don't know whether that's related purely to work or if that was just their lifestyle. 71% stated that it was important in their daily lives. What about children and the internet? Anybody want to hazard a guess how many hours a week children spend in front of a screen?
A week?
A week. Yeah, 44 hours a week in front of a
What
screen.
kind of job?
Yes. They asked many kids in a survey, Richard Louv, who wrote a book, if you're a parent, I really encourage you to read this book. I think if you're a school teacher, you ought to read it. It's called Last Child in the Woods, and it talks a little bit about the effect of a term he coined called nature deficit disorder. we've got a generation of children now that are not getting outside and being able to connect with natural environments. And they interviewed one child, and this was a quote that he said, "I like to play indoors better because that's where all of the electrical outlets are." And it sort of gives you the idea. They spend so much time, they get so much of their information from the internet. We continue to use other types of communication efforts. Here's one that was put up by, sorry I can't read that sign, but probably a state agency. And I love the part that says, "Cold water, no life jacket equals no chance." And then you see people like this, kayaking, no life jackets. How about this guy? This is rock climber Alex Honnold. He's training on a climb called Free Rider for the first ever rope-free climb of El Capitan in Yosemite. El Capitan is one of the largest monoliths of rock in the world, some of the most challenging rock climbing in the world. When it was first pioneered, climbing teams used to spend multiple nights on the route, sleeping in hammocks, and then continuing on up. It would take several days to make this climb. And he wanted to be able to do it in a single day. And in order to do that, he couldn't use any kind of safety equipment. It slows you down dramatically. And so here he is climbing in Yosemite Valley, way above the trees, with no safety equipment at all. If he falls, you can imagine what's going to happen. Not only that, the National Geographic was going to turn this into a feature magazine story and a film.
I actually saw that.
Did you really?
In IMAX.
Uh-huh.
And in that documentary, they actually had one guy die in that hammock of exhaustion.
Really?
I don't know who it was, but he was just standing there and then he just died like that. It's crazy.
Here's a quote from Alex. He says, "While free soloing, that means climbing without any safety equipment. Obviously, I know that I'm in danger, but feeling fearful while I'm up there is not helping me in any way." And here's a photo that I copied off an internet site. I don't know whether you guys can see it. If you were up close to the screen, you could. It's a grizzly bear right here. He's got his cell phone out to take a good picture. I'm surprised he didn't throw something at the bear because the bear's head is, he's digging up. The bear has dug up all this stuff. He's looking for whatever underground to eat.
What does he have in his hand?
Hiking poles.
They're not to
No.
the bear up?
All you do would be aggravate a bear if you poked it with that. If you ever had an encounter with a bear, the best prevention is knowledge, making a lot of noise so you don't come upon one. Usually they will leave the area if they hear people. But their eyesight isn't really good at far distances. They hear pretty well unless there's white noise like moving water and stuff in the background. Sense of smell is better than a bloodhound. So if you have anything on you, they can really...
I would like to point out that I did put noisemakers on.
Oh, okay. That's a good thing, yeah. Yeah.
Parent trap.
Yes. Well, I can't believe this guy's taking a picture of a grizzly that close. Well, this brings me to the study that I did with some research questions. As I said, I've had an interest in computers for a while and also communication of information via the internet. And having seen that article or that advertisement with the guy wearing the same shoes that we helped rescue, and then looking at so many websites, I started thinking, what are we really communicating to people? And this is what I came up with. I said, with the increased reliance on technology and the internet, is outdoor safety information being communicated? So I first asked the question, is it being communicated? What types of information are being communicated? Are recreationalists being informed about the importance of being able to survive a night out on their own if they got caught or were injured? And also, are there differences in the amount of safety information being communicated with regard to type of website? And for my purposes, I categorized websites as being either commercial, government developed, or private individuals or an organization. I put those in the same category. Here are the methods that I used. Content analysis was used to examine the textual outdoor safety information communicated by websites. A central idea in content analysis is that The many words of the text are classified into fewer content categories. I did a Google web search for 10 popular outdoor activities: camping, hiking, backpacking, climbing, canoeing, kayaking as a one term, mountain biking, backcountry skiing and snowmobiling, fly fishing, and hunting. I did that search and I took the top 20 results for each activity. These were included to give me a total of 200 different websites. For textual information, each site was examined for a group of keywords: emergency, accident, safe or safety, prevent, rescue. Hypothermia was one I used. The Grand Canyon is really a great example of hyperthermia, but hypothermia is what gets a lot of people in trouble. And also hazard. The frequency of use of each word was counted for individual websites, and the sum score and total frequencies for the words were calculated to categorize them into different categories. And those categories were absent, low, or high. In terms of the analysis, I used chi-square and Kramer's V to test the association between safety information and type of website. And I also looked at pictures and video clips. You know, they often say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and oftentimes we communicate messages via pictures. And so I looked at those as to whether or not they were negative or positive. Finally, both textual and graphic information were used to assign an overall rating for outdoor safety information. Was it absent, was it positive, or was it negative? This was done for each one of the websites. And here are the results. With regard to safety information for all the websites combined, what I found was that 45% of the total websites of the 200 that I looked at contained some positive information. 46% contained no information related to safety whatsoever. 9% overall had negative information. In other words, they were showing people doing unsafe practices or even offering textual information that communicated the same. In terms of safety information for commercial sites and then the organization and private websites, here's the commercial sites over here on the left. They actually did the worst with regard for safety information. They had positive information on 35% of the sites. It was absent on 53% of the sites, and 12% of the sites had negative information. For the organization and private sites, this could be a website put up by an individual, or it could be something like an organization. It could be, I think the Sierra Club came up on one of the hits. I had some Boy Scouts, which surprised me they made it as high as they did. Outdoor clubs, every once in a while. I had a fly fishing club that was a local organization that came up. And they did a little better than the commercial side. They had 53% positive compared to 35. 38% was absent, 9% negative. Who did the best? It was the government sites. And I might have predicted this really, because they're the ones that have to go out and rescue people and foot the bill in many cases. There was no negative information on any of the government sites that came up. 69% had positive information, and then 31% didn't have any safety information whatsoever. Here is one of the chi-square tables where I looked at the overall classification of website by safety information. And pretty much what I showed you in the pie charts a while ago, but commercial, government, organization, private, negative, positive, and then absent. And this turned out to be significant at 0.01 level. And then this one was actually looking at number of keywords, and again, it's reflected as with the other category where we looked at everything. The commercial sites that had no information, 73%, 14% had low information, 12% had high. Government, again, did the best, 26, almost 27% in the high category, 38% in the low, and then absent. And then the organizations and private websites, more of a balance between no information and low information. Here are a few other additional results that I found. Only 36.5% of websites presented textual safety information, with just 14% providing detailed information. Oftentimes it was just admonitions to be safe or be careful. In terms of really detailed information, not as much. Only 10% of all websites presented information about hypothermia. This is something that is a preliminary thing that gets a lot of people in trouble. I would bet everybody in the room has experienced hypothermia at one time or another. If you have been cold and you started to shiver, you're going into the first stage of hypothermia. And this is something that just progresses over the course of hours, unless it's acute. If you fall in through the ice into a lake, you get it very quickly. But typically it's systemic hypothermia, and it affects your decision making. As a search and rescue person that used to train individuals, one of the things we hate to see when we're looking for individuals, we always ask what were they wearing, a complete description of the color and types of clothing. If you start finding an individual's clothing, that's a very bad sign, because in the latter stages of hypothermia, they oftentimes feel a little warm and their decision-making abilities are gone, and they start shedding clothes, which just exacerbates the problem. So nothing was found on the majority of websites about that. And just 5% of all websites presented information about the 10 essentials that we talked about, which could help individuals survive an unexpected night in the wild. In my conclusions, government sites do the best job of providing safety information. 69% did. Most sites can improve their safety information communication efforts. And I've talked to some resource managers at different areas and shared some of the results of this. And a lot of them reflected and said, you know, we don't have hardly anything on our site. Next time we do a revision, that's something we think we're going to try and improve. Certainly information on weather, hypothermia, strategies for surviving a night in the wild should receive a lot more attention on the internet. And more information about educating visitors about the appropriate use of technology and its limitations is needed. The millennial generation has the cell phones in their hands all the time. They walk. I have a cartoon on my refrigerator, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek funny. And it says Darwinism in the millennials. And they're walking along, looking at their cell phone like this, and all of a sudden the trail takes a sharp turn around and there's a cliff, and they're going right over the cliff. It's pretty interesting. That's where they're getting a lot of their information. Many of them think it will save them, and in a lot of cases it will not. Cell phones die out in the wild. They don't work in so many places. And just the fact that they're calling for trivial reasons. A lot of rescue and park personnel don't have the money or the personnel to do this all the time. And they've even stated they're going to have to start and ascertain how much trouble are they in, really. And in some cases say, figure it out for yourselves. Further research is needed to examine more outdoor sports and activities. I did 10. There are many others besides that. We should determine ways to encourage commercial websites to communicate safety information more effectively. They are the worst in terms of giving out that kind of information. And we should explore other issues, maybe with the same technique. Another issue for many managers is trying to reduce the impact. We've, for years, they've coined the phrase, we're loving the parks to death. So many people. And certain techniques that you do cause a lot of damage to the environment, and there are things you can do to mitigate that. But a lot of people don't know it very well. I've often thought it would be nice to have a certification very similar to a driver's test, where you read a booklet, pass a test, and you get your license to go on any trail you want to. Nobody's taken that torch. A couple had volunteered, but theirs required you to go to their school, spend 3 weeks out in the wild, and spend $3,000, and they'd certify you. That certainly isn't going to work. But that's another area that might be interesting, the whole Leave No Trace mission. Also observe the effectiveness of on-site media. We still use that a lot But brochures oftentimes are looked as a panacea, but oftentimes when you're at the entrance of the park, you want to go out and do the activities, they give you the brochures, they throw them in the back seat, and off they go, and they don't even look at them. So ways that we could improve the effectiveness of that should be explored. And then certainly to develop some effective online educational materials for safety information. I'm going to close with this quote here and then see if you have any questions. I really like this quote. This was from the rescue rangers at Grand Teton National Park. This guy's employed full-time, and he basically supervises and goes on rescues for different people. This is one of the big climbing parks in the national park system. And he said, I had to do a study of all the backcountry accidents in Grand Teton National Park recently. A total of 700 injuries and deaths. That's a lot of hurt people. You know what I found? Just one wasn't due to pilot error. All the others, whether it was bad judgment or bad planning or lack of gear or the wrong gear or not knowing how to use the gear or whatever, all 699 were a direct result of pilot error. That's pretty telling, I think, in a lot of ways. So, at this point, I'll open it up for any questions you might have.
What happened to the warrant?
That's a good question. I think it was act of God, lightning strike. And I can attest to that. I have been struck by lightning. No, Stan perpetuates that myth. Only once. Only once. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah, only once for me. But that's enough. And but things like that happen. I got it in the Grand Canyon in March. But yeah.
Do you think shows like the one that's coming to mind is Bear Grylls?
Yes.
Does that help teach people how to do this, or is it kind of like the ad, like just encourages people to go out and not be prepared?
That's a great question. In my classes, we've discussed this some, and I will not doubt Bear Grylls' skills. He's a former Ranger or Special Forces for Great Britain. He's climbed Mount Everest. I mean, the man has skills for certain. But I think he hypes some of this stuff up to such a high degree. I've seen him talk about, well, you may find it necessary to climb near a frozen waterfall without a rope. I can hardly think of any reason why I need to climb near a frozen waterfall without a rope. He's often fond of getting celebrities to drink their own urine if they're in a situation where dehydration is an issue. Most experts don't recommend it simply for the reason that most people wouldn't keep it down, and then you would become more dehydrated. So I think programs like that can have a negative effect. I also think sometimes Walt Disney films, the Wilderness Family, you know, they show the family out, and it's good general entertainment, but it's almost like they treat the wilderness as a petting zoo, and if I'm not going to harm the animal, it won't harm me. There was a individual, I can't remember his last name now, Timothy something, that tried to protect the grizzly bears at Katmai National Park and thought the Park Service was doing a terrible job and violated all their regulations, and would go up close to them and talk to them. And he and his girlfriend both were attacked and consumed by a grizzly bear up there, and that was because he was doing crazy things. So I think some programs are really negative. One that was great was Any Place Wild that PBS did for a while, and they showed things like climbing the Grand Teton, but they showed responsible techniques with climbing ropes and getting the skills, or if it was backpacking, they covered what you needed to take, and always contacting somebody else, telling them where you're going to go so that if you're overdue. I mean, there's so many things you could look at. That's a good question. Yes?
Is there any research out there that addresses the upswing of tourists coming into the parks? I mean, you're saying that the kids want to stay in the house so they can be by the outlet, but what is it that's prompting tourists to visit these, over visit these parks? What in the environment, what in the society?
Sure. It could be that in the future we may see a decline a little bit if kids don't get out and experience it. I don't know. I think the baby boomers right now are pushing it. They're going into retirement. They're the biggest demographic. and a lot of them are going on trips. Look at Stan Walls, just did a 9,000, what do you say, put 9,000 miles on his vehicle, going to all
great.
kinds of national parks right after he retired. I think a lot of times it's the baby boomers right now. Yes?
Is there an organized, funded effort by the National Park Service to educate people? Or is it kind of disorganized, willy-nilly, hit or miss?
That's a good question. The area that is responsible for a lot of the communication efforts for the National Park Service, educational efforts, they call it interpretation. It's headquartered at Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. And if a park wants something done, a new brochure, a video, a website, they can contact them and they'll come and help set all of that up. So in that regard, it is funded. A lot of the individual efforts, because some of them are kind of unique, like the Grand Canyon. People get in trouble there because you hike down for the first half of your trip, but then you got to climb out. And I tell people, what's it like around Memphis? If you've never seen it, you don't know what it's like. And the easiest thing that I can tell them in terms of what it's like is that drive out to the Clark Tower building, open up the stairway on the first floor, and climb to the top. It's 36 stories high. Now do that 16 more times, and that's climbing out of the Grand Canyon in terms of elevation. There are not a whole lot of people who would be able to go up the first time. And it really is an effort. So they do leave a lot of latitude to individual parks. One thing that I would love to see would be for us to come up with some sort of an insurance model, although I don't have a lot of faith in that, given that we can't come up with general health care insurance in this country. That would, you could buy insurance for a trip that would help pay for your rescue, because a lot of the parks are eating these kinds of bills. They do more of that in Europe. The one sport that does a really good job of that is scuba diving. And if you get the bends and need to be evacuated by air to a place you can go into a decompression chamber, it's paid for with your membership. I saw, did you have a, so I saw another hand go up. Yeah.
So in your research, did you find any specific type of recreation was doing a much worse job than the others in terms of safety data?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
kayaking was
Mhm.
not putting as much compared to runners or
Hikers get in more trouble than anybody.
hikers?
That, if you look at the national park statistics, it's probably the most dangerous activity you can do, and most people would look at it as not all that problematic. But it's by not carrying the proper equipment and stumbling and, like I said, twisting your ankle or getting lost, can't spend the night out properly, that gets a lot of people in trouble. Now there's certain groups, subgroups like the climbers that are really pushing it, and some people do it with water sports, whitewater sports, but a lot of those are wearing life jackets. At least that, it's the ones that are really going into harm's way, the Class 5 rapids, they're wearing life jackets. I mean, when you look at the kinds of rivers and what that's like in the Grand Canyon, they do, but it's the more casual people in some ways. One group that does a little better than some are hunters. And one reason why I think for that is that for almost any male born after 1980 or 82, they have to have completed a hunter education course in order to get a hunting license. And one of the things they cover in all of those typically is being able to survive a situation and what's hypothermia and how to stay out of trouble. Any other questions?
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Good.